Hello. Thank you for volunteering in the School District of Philadelphia. We are so grateful that you'll be sharing your time and talents with our students. In this presentation, we'll cover the basis of volunteering in the School District of Philadelphia so that you're ready to jump right in once you start volunteering. First, we'll give you an overview of who we are as an organization, including going over our values and our demographic information. Then we'll tell you why volunteers like you are so crucial to the success of our students. The next part of our orientation will dive into the nitty-gritty paperwork that is required for all adults who want to volunteer in our buildings. We'll talk about what the Volunteer Code of Conduct is, along with which clearances you'll need and how to obtain them. We will also go over important safety measures regarding child abuse. By the end of this orientation, you'll know how to recognize the signs of child abuse and know the appropriate steps to take to report potential abuse. We'll end the orientation with a short quiz that will test your knowledge on what we've learned today. The purpose of this orientation is to prepare you to volunteer in our schools. By the end of this training, you will understand the need in our schools and how critical volunteers are in filling that need. You will understand the components of the volunteer packet and know how to complete the packet. You will feel confident about how to go about volunteering in your school. You will know how to identify signs of child abuse and steps to take in response. And finally, you'll feel excited to volunteer in our schools.
Let's start by going over who we are as an organization and school district. The School District of Philadelphia is grounded by 4 essential values: that all students can and will learn, that high-quality instruction is at the core of our work, that parents and families are our partners, and that we are trusted stewards of public resources. All of our work aims to fulfill the following powerful vision: for all children, a great school close to where they live. Our anchor goals keep us focused on achieving this vision. Every day, our teachers, principals, support staff, and administrators are working towards the following goals. 100% of students will graduate, ready for college and career. 100% of 8-year-olds will read on grade level. 100% of schools will have great principals and teachers, and we will have 100% of the funding we need for great schools and zero deficit. Altogether, we serve over 130,000 students. Our students come from a diverse range of backgrounds and experiences, something we take pride in. We have 220 schools with over 17,000 employees. Each school is unique and has its own strengths and needs.
With so many schools and such a diverse student body, we rely on volunteers to help our staff provide the best education and opportunities possible for our students. We depend on volunteers to help our students grow and reach their full potential. Raising the next generation is a shared responsibility that we should all take part in. Of course, it's easy to feel skeptical about the part that you, an individual volunteer, may play in the lives of our students. But have you ever heard the story of the starfish? It goes like this. One day, a young man was walking along a beach when he noticed an old man throwing starfish after starfish into the ocean. The starfish had washed ashore and were sure to die under the hot sun if they didn't return to the ocean. Despite the fact that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of starfish on the beach, the old man tirelessly continued to pick up and toss them into the safety of the sea. The young man shook his head at this. "You'll never be able to save them all," he told the old man. "What's the point? It doesn't matter." The old man paused to look at the young man and then threw another starfish into the ocean. "It mattered to that one," he said, and kept on going. The moral of the story is that just because one person cannot save the world, it doesn't mean that it's pointless to try. Any contribution that you make can help make a difference, no matter how small. You never know the impact that you may have on others.
Now that you know a little more about the School District of Philadelphia, we hope you feel inspired and excited to volunteer. There is one big step you'll need to take before you get started. Though, yes, we're talking about paperwork, but don't worry, we're going to go over every piece of paperwork you need, as well as how to obtain that paperwork so that you can begin volunteering as soon as possible. Starting in the 2017-2018 school year, all adults who want to volunteer in the School District of Philadelphia will need to turn in a volunteer packet to the main office of their school. The volunteer packet will include all of the required paperwork that individuals need in order to begin volunteering. By turning in all of your paperwork in one packet, your principal will be able to review clearances and check for paperwork completion more efficiently, which will in turn lead to you being able to volunteer much sooner. The volunteer packet must include the following components: the Volunteer Code of Conduct Agreement, the Child Abuse History Clearance, the Pennsylvania State Criminal Record Check, the FBI background check or a signed volunteer affirmation sheet, and a certificate of volunteer orientation completion, which you'll receive after you're done with this training. We'll go over how to access and fill out all of this paperwork in the next few sections.
You might be wondering, does anyone who enters a school need to turn in a volunteer packet? The short answer is no. Only adults, people 18 and older, who are in the school as volunteers need to turn in a volunteer packet. Adults who are visitors to the school do not need to turn in a volunteer packet. The School District of Philadelphia distinguishes between volunteers and visitors. Visitors are viewed as individuals who are attending and/or observing an event or activity without providing a service to the students, staff, or school or district operations, and who would not be responsible for the care, supervision, guidance, or control of children. Some examples of these events would include, but are not limited to, back-to-school nights, parent-teacher conferences, school assemblies, school concerts, and Halloween parades. Volunteers are defined as any adult applying for or holding an unpaid position with the school or program, activity, or service, or a person responsible for a child's welfare or having direct contact with children. Examples may include, but are not limited to, tutors or mentors, members of the School Advisory Council, Home and School Association, or Parent-Teacher Association, library helpers, front desk helpers, and field day or party helpers. Please note that the School District of Philadelphia requires field trip chaperones to have clearances on file before participating in a school trip.
Once you finish all of your paperwork, you should bring your completed volunteer packet to your school and give it to the school secretary, who will then pass it on to the principal or volunteer coordinator for review. After your paperwork is reviewed, it will be kept on file in a secure storage unit. Once the principal signs off on your Volunteer Code of Conduct Agreement, you can begin volunteering. We know that all of this paperwork is overwhelming and time-consuming. The good news is that your volunteer packet will be valid for 60 months or 5 years from the date that you obtain your clearances. This means that you will not have to turn in a new volunteer packet or take this volunteer orientation every school year. Plus, if you want to volunteer at another school, or if your child switches schools, you can use your existing volunteer packet in the new school, if the paperwork is fewer than 60 months old. Just sign a new Volunteer Code of Conduct so the principal can approve you, and you'll be all set.
The first component of the volunteer packet is the Volunteer Code of Conduct. The purpose of the Volunteer Code of Conduct is to explain expectations and standards for volunteers in the School District of Philadelphia. The Volunteer Code of Conduct summarizes the standard behavior, professionalism, and respect that all volunteers must adhere to when in our schools. All volunteers must read, agree to, and sign the Volunteer Code of Conduct before volunteering with the School District of Philadelphia. If volunteers breach any of the standards in the Code of Conduct, the principal has grounds for barring the individual from volunteering in the school. The first standard in the Volunteer Code of Conduct states that volunteers will sign in at the school's main office immediately upon arrival. This is required by School District of Philadelphia Policy 907, School Visitors. Policy 907 clearly states that upon arrival at the school, the visitor must sign the visitor's register in the school office, where the visitor will be given instructions as well as a visitor's pass or identification badge, and if necessary, provided with an escort. The second standard in the Volunteer Code of Conduct states that volunteers will follow the directions of the building administrators, teachers, and/or appropriate staff members. Again, Policy 907 on school visitors states that no visitor shall be permitted to interrupt a staff member in the performance of duties, whether that interruption be for conversation or observation. Section 1116D of the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, states that parents and families should have reasonable access to staff, opportunities to volunteer, and participate in their child's class, and observation of classroom activities. School District of Philadelphia Policy 907 also states that visits to classrooms must be scheduled in advance unless authorized by the principal or designee. Classroom volunteering and/or observations should be scheduled with the consent of the classroom teacher or appropriate administrator. At some grade levels and for some students, the presence of parents in the classroom causes a disruption and is a hindrance to student learning. Therefore, it'll be up to the discretion of the classroom teacher and/or appropriate administrator as to when and how to allow parents or family members in the classroom. The teacher, appropriate administrator, and parent or family member should have a discussion to find the best time, place, and scenario for the parent-family member to help improve the child's academic achievement. If parents or family members disagree with the determination that school has made, they have the right to submit a complaint to the district. In general, volunteers are guests in the school building, and they must abide by the rules of the school while there. The third standard in the Volunteer Code of Conduct states that volunteers agree to conduct themselves in a professional, respectful manner at all times, with the understanding that they are role models for students. In general, volunteers should be aware of the language used while volunteering, wear appropriate clothing for a school setting, use an indoor voice to avoid causing distractions, treat all individuals, students, staff members, parents, and other volunteers with respect. The fourth standard in the Volunteer Code of Conduct states that volunteers understand that they are responsible for following the policies and procedures of the School District of Philadelphia, that they understand that the School District of Philadelphia has a strong commitment to diversity and inclusion, and that they will uphold these values while volunteering. Volunteers also agree to refrain from sharing their personal or political views with students while volunteering, and if they have any questions about this, they will ask a staff member. Policy 102 on multiracial, multicultural, and gender education indicates that the district shall foster knowledge about and respect for those of all races, ethnic groups, social classes, genders, religions, disabilities, sexual orientations, perceived or known, and gender identities, perceived or known. Policy 102 also states, the School District of Philadelphia envisions a society that will ensure respect for all cultures, dignity for all communities, and justice for all people. We expect our volunteers to take part in this vision. Furthermore, Policy 252 on transgender and gender nonconforming students states that students have the right to be addressed by a name and pronoun that corresponds to the student's gender identity. We want all students to feel comfortable and safe in our schools. The fifth standard in the Volunteer Code of Conduct states that volunteers will share with teachers and/or administrators when they have any concerns related to a student's welfare or safety. The basic rule of thumb here is, if you see something, say something. We all need to work together to ensure our students are safe. If volunteers suspect a child is being abused or neglected, they can speak to staff members or make a report directly to Childline. We will cover this more in depth later in the orientation. Reporting your suspicions, either to Childline or to a staff member, does not mean the child will be separated from their family. The sixth standard in the Volunteer Code of Conduct states that volunteers will only use adult bathroom facilities. Volunteers should not be in private and supervised spaces such as bathrooms or locker rooms with students. Volunteers should ask the main office staff if they are unsure where the adult bathroom is located or need a key to access it. Again, this is about keeping our students as safe as possible.
The seventh standard in the Volunteer Code of Conduct states that volunteers will not possess weapons of any type while on school property or during school events off the premises. School District Policy 218.1 on weapons states that, quote, possession of weapons in the school setting is a threat to the safety of students and staff and is prohibited by law, closed quote. The eighth standard in the Volunteer Code of Conduct states that volunteers will not possess or use tobacco or any nicotine-related products and will not possess or be under the influence of alcohol, marijuana, or illegal drugs on school property or during school events off premises. School District Policy 323 on tobacco use explains that it is against Pennsylvania state law to use tobacco products in school buildings, stadiums, or bleachers, and this policy extends to staff and visitors, which includes volunteers. Furthermore, School District Policy 351 on alcohol, drug, and substance abuse explains that all district properties are drug-free and alcohol-free zones. We expect our volunteers to abide by this same policy while on school grounds. The ninth standard in the Volunteer Code of Conduct states that volunteers understand that if they happen to learn private or sensitive information in the course of volunteering, they are not to share this information with anyone. Such information must remain confidential. Examples of information that should remain private includes the following: student records, health information, attendance reports, conduct reports, court reports, student grades and test scores, applications for status and federal assistance, gender, sexual identity of an individual, and immigration status of an individual. FERPA, which is Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, protects this information from being shared without consent. The 10th standard in the Volunteer Code of Conduct states that volunteers agree to avoid exploiting students or influencing them into engaging in illegal or immoral behavior. Again, all volunteers are expected to act as role models to students. A volunteer should be a positive influence at the school. Volunteers should encourage students to strive for excellence both academically and behaviorally. This includes following school and district policies as well as state and federal laws. The 11th standard in the Volunteer Code of Conduct states that volunteers agree that they will not engage in sexual harassment of students, other volunteers, or school employees, and that they will avoid inappropriate contact with students. Child abuse will not be tolerated in the School District of Philadelphia. There are appropriate and inappropriate ways of interacting with students. These will be covered later in the orientation. Volunteers are expected to interact with students, staff, and other volunteers in appropriate ways at all times. The 12th and final standard in the Volunteer Code of Conduct states that volunteers agree to notify the school immediately if they are arrested for a misdemeanor or felony, sex, drug, assault, or weapon-related offense. According to School District Policy 916 on volunteers, volunteers must make a written report to the principal or appropriate administrator within 72 hours regarding an arrest or conviction.
The principal or appropriate administrator will then immediately require a volunteer to submit new certifications if they have a reasonable belief that the volunteer was arrested for or has been convicted of an offense required to be reported by law, was named as a perpetrator in a founded or indicated report, or has provided written notice of such occurrence. Failure to accurately report such occurrences may subject the volunteer to disciplinary action up to and including denial of volunteer service and criminal prosecution.
The next component of the volunteer packet is obtaining the proper clearances. The School District of Philadelphia requires all adults who volunteer in our schools to have their clearances on file. This is to keep our students as safe as possible. All volunteers need 3 clearances: the Child Abuse History Clearance, the Pennsylvania State Criminal Record Check, and either the FBI background check with fingerprinting or a signed volunteer affirmation. Both the Child Abuse and PA Criminal Record Check clearances are free and available online. You can click on the links listed in this webinar or go to www.philasd.org/face to find links to the clearance websites. In order to obtain each clearance, you will need to create an account online, which will ask for personal information such as your name and contact information. Because you are a volunteer, these clearances are free. Simply check off volunteer when creating your online account and the fee will be waived. After you create an account and submit your clearance request, the clearance results will be sent to your email address. If you do not have an email address, you can download and print a paper copy of the clearances and then mail them to the state. You can also always reach out to your Family Engagement Liaison or Coordinator, or you can stop in the Parent and Family Resource Center at 440 North Broad Street, and our customer service liaisons will be happy to assist you. Lastly, you'll need to obtain either an FBI background check with fingerprinting or sign a volunteer affirmation sheet. If you have lived in the state of Pennsylvania for the past 10 years consecutively, you should sign the volunteer affirmation sheet, which states that you swear to having lived in the state of Pennsylvania for the past 10 years and that during that time you have not committed any federal crimes. The volunteer affirmation sheet is free and available online at www.philasd.org/face. If you have not lived in Pennsylvania for the past 10 years consecutively, you will need to complete the FBI background check and complete fingerprinting at a designated Identigo location. Go to the link listed here to fill out an online registration form and to find out where the designated Identigo fingerprinting locations are. The FBI background check costs $21.35. It is the only volunteer clearance that costs money. In summary, all volunteers must have the following clearances on file at the school before they begin volunteering: the Child Abuse History Clearance, the Pennsylvania Criminal Record Check, and the FBI background check or a signed volunteer affirmation. As mentioned earlier, your clearances will be valid for 60 months or 5 years, so you will not have to obtain clearances at the start of every school year. We know that the clearance process is confusing. Here are some common questions and answers that we hope will help clear up your concerns. If something comes up on your background clearance, you should know that the School District of Philadelphia recognizes that a background check alone is not an indication of the value that volunteers offer our students. When reviewing background clearances, the School District of Philadelphia also considers the following: the safety of our students and staff, the nature and gravity of the offense, the time that has passed since the conviction and/or sentence, the nature of the volunteer work for which the applicant is requesting to volunteer, and the positive impact the individual has had within the community since the offense. Principals will review all background clearances and determine if information is disclosed that should bar the individual from volunteering in the school. If principals have questions about information disclosed on background clearances, they should email the Deputy, Student Rights and Responsibilities. Any volunteer who is barred from volunteering in a school as a result of a clearance may appeal the school-based decision by emailing parentappeals@philasd.org. As for individuals who do not have Social Security numbers, it is still possible to volunteer. Social Security numbers are only required on the FBI background check. The Child Abuse History Clearance and Pennsylvania State Criminal Record Check do not require Social Security numbers, nor does the Volunteer Affirmation Sheet. This means that individuals who do not have Social Security numbers, such as undocumented individuals, can fill out the Child Abuse and Criminal Record Check clearances along with the Volunteer Affirmation Sheet if they have lived in the state of Pennsylvania for the past 10 years. If the individual does not have a Social Security number and has not lived in the state of Pennsylvania for the past 10 years, it is still possible to volunteer. The School District of Philadelphia aims to include as many families as possible in its volunteer program, and as such, the district is flexible with individuals who simply do not have Social Security numbers. The district allows individuals to volunteer without the FBI background check on file as long as the following conditions are met. The individual has their child abuse history clearance on file. The individual has their Pennsylvania State Criminal Record Check on file. The individual has a school district employee with them as a supervisor at all times.
In order to volunteer in our schools, it's important that all volunteers understand their role in keeping our students safe, including how to identify signs of child abuse and what to do if a child exhibits these signs. It's important that volunteers have general knowledge of the signs of child abuse and what to do if they suspect potential cases of child abuse. Protecting our students is a shared responsibility in which we expect everyone, including volunteers, to take part. Child abuse and neglect is not a new phenomenon. It has been documented for more than 2,000 years. For most of human history, children had no rights in the eyes of the law, and it was unthinkable that the law would intervene in the domain of family. In the United States, one of the first legal responses to child abuse occurred in 1874 in New York. In a case that was to have significant repercussions, Henry Berg, acting as a private citizen, pleaded in court to have an 8-year-old child named Mary Ellen Wilson removed from her abusive and neglectful environment. Although there were laws in New York that allowed the state to remove neglected children from their homes, New York City authorities had been reluctant to take up Mary Ellen's cause. During a court hearing, Mr. Berg emphasized that he was determined within the framework of the law to prevent the frequent cruelties practiced on children. As a result of Mr. Berg's advocacy, Mary Ellen was removed from her abusive situation. She eventually married, had 2 daughters, and lived to be 92 years old. Mary Ellen's case led to the formation of societies and ultimately laws in many states to protect children from cruelty, abuse, and neglect. Now let's fast forward to Pennsylvania in 2011. Many of you may be familiar with the Jerry Sandusky child abuse scandal that happened in State College, Pennsylvania. Jerry Sandusky was a celebrated assistant football coach for Penn State University. Sandusky also founded a nonprofit organization called the Second Mile, which served underprivileged and at-risk youth in Pennsylvania. After he retired as an assistant coach at Penn State, Sandusky continued to volunteer for the Second Mile. This is where he met his molestation victims. They were participating in the organization that Sandusky was a volunteer for. In 2011, Sandusky was arrested and charged with 52 counts of sexual abuse of young boys over a 15-year period from 1994 to 2009. Spurred by the Sandusky child abuse case, the Pennsylvania General Assembly created the Task Force on Child Protection, whose job it was to conduct a comprehensive review of the laws and procedures relating to the reporting of child abuse and the protection of the health and safety of children. As a result of the task force's recommendations, more than 20 pieces of legislation were enacted by the Pennsylvania General Assembly. These new laws, which took effect on December 31, 2014, affect all aspects of child abuse and neglect cases, from child abuse reports to investigations.
As a result of this new legislation on child abuse reporting, the definition and role of a mandated reporter was clarified. all school district of Philadelphia staff members are mandated reporters, meaning that they are legally required to report suspicions of child abuse and neglect. Volunteers are not mandated reporters, but we do hope any volunteer who sees something suspicious will speak up, either by talking to the principal, teacher, or other staff member, or they making a report to Childline themselves. We want our volunteers to know that they can turn to any school district of Philadelphia staff members if they are worried that a child is being abused or neglected. We'll spend the remainder of the volunteer orientation going over the basics of how to identify and recognize child abuse, as well as how you should respond if you suspect a child is being abused or neglected. Volunteers, unlike school district staff members, are permissive reporters. This means that they are encouraged to report suspected child abuse, but they are not required to do so by law. While permissive reporters are not required to say or do anything, we hope that if you see something suspicious in the course of volunteering, you will say something to a district staff member. As a permissive reporter, you can choose to talk to a staff member who can then make the report to Childline since they are a mandated reporter. You can also make the call to Childline yourself. It's up to you. The rest of this orientation will give you some tools and a high-level overview of the potential signs of child abuse so you can be a bit more educated on this topic. Our goal in the next part of the orientation is to provide you with an overview of different types of child abuse, as well as common signs of child abuse. We also want you to know that you are not expected to act alone in recognizing child abuse. It is the responsibility of staff members in the School District of Philadelphia to recognize and report potential child abuse because they are mandated reporters. We want you to understand through this orientation that you can go to staff member if you see something that doesn't seem right. And we'll also educate you on Childline, a state service that accepts reports of potential child abuse from the public. Lastly, we hope to provide you with a wealth of additional resources so that if you want to dive deeper into this topic, you can do so. The child abuse overview that we are about to deliver was created by drawing from resources from keepkidssafe.pa.gov, which is the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services website for information about child abuse. We have a slide at the end of the orientation that lists the links used to gather the information in case you would like to learn more. The first step in identifying signs of child abuse is to know how to define child abuse itself. At its most basic form, child abuse and neglect is defined under federal law as any recent act or failure to act which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse, or exploitation of a child, and an act or failure to act which presents an imminent risk of serious harm to a child. Of course, there are forms of verbal and physical interaction between adults and children that are appropriate. These include praising a child and positively reinforcing good work or behavior, as well as patting a child on the back, holding the hand of a young child as they get off the bus, and briefly hugging a child as long as the child appears to be comfortable and the physical contact is not romanticized or sexually intimate in any way. Inappropriate or harmful verbal or physical interactions between adults and children will not be tolerated. These include, but are not limited to, sexually provocative or degrading comments, risque jokes, paddling the buttocks, intimate, romantic, or sexual contact, corporal punishment, and showing or involving a child in pornographic activities.
There are different types of child abuse. We'll be going over 4 types in this orientation, the first of which is physical abuse. Physical abuse is defined as any physical injury or death inflicted by other than accidental means. Signs of physical abuse can include any of the following, but please keep in mind that this is not a complete list. Unexplained burns, unexplained bruises on the face, lips, mouth, back, buttocks, and thighs, dental or head injuries, human bites, multiple hospital visits, a child who seems frightened of their parents and does not want to go home, a child who fears being with a particular staff member, physical force used by caregivers, and a child who seems too eager to please others. Again, this list is not definitive. A child may exhibit these signs without experiencing abuse, or a child may be experiencing physical abuse but not exhibit any of the signs that we've listed. We also want to be clear. All parents get angry at their children sometimes. It's a myth that good parents don't get frustrated or angry with their children's behavior. The truth is, we all get angry at our children sometimes. It is okay to be angry, but it is not okay to hurt your children in anger. Now let's go over a scenario that volunteers might encounter regarding potential physical abuse. It's the first warm day of spring, and Jordan, age 10, is wearing shorts. You notice she has circular burn marks up and down her thighs. They are the size and shape of a cigarette. You ask her what happened to her legs, and she says, "Nothing." What could you say? If you feel comfortable, something like this: "Jordan, that looks like it really hurt. I want to help you. You can tell me what happened." This is a recommended response. If you do not feel comfortable responding, simply report your observation directly to a staff member. Whether you decide to speak to Jordan or not, we encourage all of our volunteers to say something if you see something. The next step is to speak to the teacher, principal, or another staff member. Tell them what you observed, and if you spoke to the child, tell them about the conversation. If you feel uncomfortable speaking to a staff member, you can always call Childline, which is a state-run hotline where anyone can report potential cases of child abuse. We'll go over how to make a call to Childline later in the orientation.
The next type of child abuse that we'll discuss is sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is defined as occurring when a person uses power over a child and directly involves the child in any sexual act, involves the child in pornography, or forces the child to witness sexual acts. Signs of sexual abuse can include any of the following. The child suddenly refuses to participate in physical activities. The child has difficulties or pain in walking or sitting. The child has frequent and unexplained sore throats. The child has yeast or urinary infections. The child has torn or bloody underclothes. The child aggressively initiates sexual contact with other child. The child has unusual sexual knowledge or behavior. Child-to-child sexual contact. The child has bruises on their inner thighs. The child has fear of being alone with a particular individual. The child suffers from sleep disorders and anxiety, irritability, or constant inattentiveness. Again, we want to emphasize that this is not an all-inclusive list. A child may show these signs and not be experiencing any sexual abuse, or any child may be experiencing sexual abuse and not show any of these signs at all. Remember, you can always turn into a staff member if you are unsure or have any questions. Let's go over a scenario regarding potential sexual abuse. Mr. J works for the organization that manages an after-school program at the school. A child tells you Mr. J's pee-pee is bigger than his. What could you say? Our recommendations is that in this situation, in which it is best to say nothing, you do not want to bias or influence the child's story. What should you do next? Remember, if you see something, say something. This is a potentially serious situation. We recommend that volunteers immediately tell the school principal so that Mr. J can be reassigned to a role that does not involve interaction with children while the report is investigated. Volunteers can also speak to the teacher, principal, or other staff members. Tell them what you observed, and if you spoke to the child, tell them about the conversation. If they prefer, volunteers can also call Childline themselves and describe their observation.
The next form of child abuse that we will discuss is emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is defined as a pattern of harmful interactions between the parent or guardian and the child, such as criticizing, belittling, rejecting, or withholding love, resulting in impaired psychological growth and development. Signs of emotional abuse can include eating disorders like bulimia or anorexia, nervous habits such as biting nails, washing hands excessively, or showing extreme anxiety, cruel behavior such as using physical force or words to hurt another person or animal, a lack of emotional attachment to parent or guardian, delayed physical or emotional development, and attempts of suicide. Again, this list is not all-inclusive. Some children may exhibit these signs for different reasons unrelated to emotional abuse. You can always ask a staff member if you're concerned that a child is being emotionally abused. The staff member can help determine whether the child is potentially being emotionally abused, and they can follow up with a report to Childline if they believe it is necessary. The last form of child abuse that we will go over is neglect. Neglect is defined as the failure of a parent or guardian to provide for a child's basic needs, which include food, shelter, supervision, and clothing, their educational needs, or their medical needs. Neglect may exist because of the refusal to provide or because the family does not have the financial means to provide for the child. Signs of neglect can include begging for food or stealing money or food, poor hygiene, unsuitable or dirty clothing, low height and weight average, excessive absences, chronic hunger, assuming adult responsibilities such as caring for younger siblings or cooking meals, behavior that is dull or lethargic, being overly tired and inappropriately seeking attention. Again, this list is not all-inclusive, and volunteers should turn to staff members if they have concerns about a child who might be experiencing neglect. To give you an idea of what neglect might look like, we'll watch this short video where a teacher shares her experiences of identifying neglect and what happened when she reported the incident.
The first call I ever had to make right out of the gate after finishing my education was a case of neglect. It was mostly related to dress and the weather. We had a very cold winter where I was teaching, and the clothing was inappropriate for the weather. It was more summer or springtime clothing, and we were in the dead of winter. Talking with the child and just documenting what was worn, what she said about if there were clothes, if she had a coat. Also related with whether she was having breakfast or if there was food in the house. So when I needed to make that call, I went to my administrator with the documentation that was dated, showed a pattern of what I was seeing, and she suggested that I make the call. The first case that I told you about, the neglect case, that I think ended really well. They ended up assigning both a family mentor and a social worker who then gave the mom resources so that she could get the coat and the appropriate clothes. And then they also did a family mentorship program with her where they actually went into the home and really helped her with some parenting skills, just helping her with that. And so that, that relationship with that parent was not altered in any way. I think she was thankful for the help.
Here's a scenario that a volunteer might encounter regarding a case of neglect. 6-year-old Marjorie tells you she had to make dinner for her 2 younger siblings, ages 1 and 2, when her mom went to work. No other adults were in the home. What could you say? Something simple like this. Wow, I bet that was hard. With a child of this age, it might be best not to elaborate on the story. Again, this is a recommended response. If you do not feel comfortable responding, simply report your observation directly to a staff member. What should you do? Remember, if you see something, say something. A staff member can find out if the family needs help finding babysitters or building social connections. Volunteers can speak to the teacher, principal, or other staff member to tell them what they observed. And if you spoke to the child, tell the staff member about the conversation. If they prefer, volunteers can also call Childline directly to make a report.
Now, let's go over how to make a report, should you choose to do so. As we went through the various scenarios, we kept referencing something called Childline. Childline is part of a mandated statewide child protective services program designed to accept child abuse referrals and general child well-being concerns and transmit the information quickly to the appropriate investigating agency. If they choose to, volunteers can make a report directly to Childline by calling the Childline hotline number at 1-800-932-0313. Volunteers are not required to make reports. If volunteers do not feel comfortable making a report, they can always tell a staff member what they observe, and the staff member can make the report to Childline. As mandated reporters, School District of Philadelphia staff members must report potential cases of child abuse. They must make immediate and direct reports of suspected child abuse to Childline. If a child does happen to confide in you that they may have experienced abuse, you should take the following steps in responding to the child. Listen to the child. Reassure the child. Remain calm and collected. Provide any immediate help you can offer the child to ensure safety. Do not promise the child that you will not tell anyone. We strongly encourage you to go to a staff member after the conversation. Do not share the information that the child disclosed to you with their alleged abuser. You can also always call in a staff member to handle the situation if you do not feel comfortable having the child confide in you. Child abuse is never black and white. It's often unclear whether to report or not. A good rule of thumb is to always err on the side of the child. Remember, you are not there to investigate the situation or interrogate anyone. Let the school staff determine whether to make a report if you do not want to call Childline yourself. If a report is made, the experts from Childline will determine what happened and conduct the investigation. We also want to clear up a common myth about making a report of child abuse. The myth is that when you make a child abuse report, the child will be removed from their family. But in reality, the fact is that less than 5% of children reported for abuse or neglect are removed from the home, and usually it is not long-term. For those who are not removed, their families are provided with services to ensure the safety of the child. We'll end our volunteer orientation by going over some common questions and concerns about the volunteer's role as a permissive reporter of child abuse. Are volunteers required to report potential child abuse? No. Volunteers are not mandated reporters. Volunteers, like anyone in the state of Pennsylvania, are classified as permissive reporters. This means that they are encouraged to report child abuse, but not required to do so. Do you have to know for sure that the child was abused when making the report to Childline? No. You can make a report anytime you suspect a child is a victim of abuse. Must a permissive reporter give their name? Permissive reporters are not required to give their name. However, providing this information is helpful, so if clarification on the situation is needed or additional information is needed, the children and youth caseworker can contact the reporter. If you choose to provide your name, your identity will be kept confidential with the exception of being released to law enforcement or the district attorney's office. Here is a list of helpful free resources that can provide you with more information on child abuse recognition, prevention, and reporting, should you wish to learn more. If you have any additional questions or concerns, please reach out to the Office of Family and Community Engagement by emailing us at volunteer@philasd.org or by calling 215-400-4180, option 6.